Still sitting in a truck seat that's older than your favorite pair of work boots? Your back has been filing complaints for years. If your seat is worn out, sagging, or just plain uncomfortable, it's time for an upgrade. Head on over to seatspecialist.com. Check out their selection of quality replacement seats built to keep you comfortable mile after mile. And don't forget to use promo code TR104U to save 10% on your order. Seatspecialist.com, because a better ride starts with a better seat.
Welcome back to another episode of That's Delivered. I'm your host, Trucking Ray, and today we have another great show for you. Where, as always, we're talking with people who work in the industry and also keep things going in the industry, keep it moving. Today's guest is a returning guest. It shows he brings thoughtful perspective from a union, a local Teamster 638 in Minnesota. Scott Wilkie. He's a business agent that since the last time we've been on the show, he stepped up to a bigger role, president of Local 638. Scott has been deeply involved in labor movement for years, advocating for workers, helping organize new groups, and pushing conversations about the future of trucking and transportation. Last time we was on the show, we talked a lot about union organizing victories, concerns about automation, and how the labor movement is adapting to a rapidly changing industry. But a lot has happened since then, trucking and labor, and honestly, just in the country in general. So today, I wanted to check in and get caught up, talk about the things that are standing that we want to make sure we get covered and what's going on. Maybe we can get this ground covered with when it comes to leadership, what it looks like in a new role and where he thinks these things are headed. Scott, welcome back to the show. Scott,
Hey,
welcome
Ray.
to the show. Glad to have you on. How you doing?
Glad to be back, man. Thanks for having me. There's been a lot that's happened since we spoke last.
I know, man. Big things happening. And I'm sure
Yeah.
you're also a part of that as well. I mean, you're doing a lot of great things out there for the local 638. And I wanted to get caught up since we last talked. Last thing that we talked about was some major organization, movements, momentum, the conversations helping inside labor. And since then, what have you seen on the ground? Have the conversations around union organizing or worker engagement continue to grow for helping things shift maybe in maybe a surprising way that maybe people weren't expected?
Yeah, well, we see, at our local, we're a general local, so we have the blessing of being able to, organize a variety of different industries. We're not pigeonholed by one. So we have a lot of drivers, but we're not just logistics, right? So we're fortunate that we're able to organize in a variety of industries with different employers, and what we've seen is what a lot of people are feeling right now, which is some economic concerns. And I think what happens when you see maybe a dip in the economy or life gets more expensive, you start looking for ways to give yourself and your family a leg up. And what people have realized is that one of those avenues is a union contract. And I bet you in the last year, the amount of folks reaching out to want to be union, want to be Teamsters, I mean, I bet you it's increased fivefold from what it was a year ago. We're having folks reach out from all sorts of different industries, especially in North Dakota now, which, most people know North Dakota is a red state, and typically in those right to work states, unions aren't as popular. But I think what we've seen over the last year or two, especially from the leadership at our IBT, is that unions are not a partisan issue. You can be a union member and be a Republican. You can be a union member and be a Democrat or an independent or whatever. It's not a political thing. And some people try to make it a political thing. It just really isn't. And I think folks are starting to realize that, especially younger workers. And in North Dakota, we've seen a huge uptick in all sorts of industries that want to organize and become Teamsters. Most recently, we had a group of folks who are like construction workers who build and repair water towers. I think I'll have to talk with Tony, who's the business agent who's organizing it, and Hannah, but I think they've got cards signed now, and it was something like 90% of the folks voted. They're turning cards already. So it's pretty cool to see. We're on this cusp right now of trying to meet the moment, though, where we've got a lot of organizing interest. and we have to make sure that those folks get the full service of Local 638 right away, right? Because if you're going to dip your toes into the union world and you're feeling a little apprehensive, right? Then you might not have the best experience. We want to make sure that folks feel like they're getting all of us. So we're right now trying to shift some of the work around, which there's a lot of it, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, but there's a lot of work being done already at the local, but making sure that those folks who are wanting to become union, who are saying, yep, I want to be a part of this, they're getting all of us and getting a good experience right out of the gate. So we've partnered with our joint council, which if you don't know what that is, it's essentially all the locals here within the Midwest. So North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, a little bit of Wisconsin, and all of Minnesota here, where we're hiring organizers that are going to work for the joint council and essentially help us, with these folks that want to be a union. Because me here in Minneapolis today, it's a bit of a jaunt to Williston, North Dakota, to meet with folks face to face and build those relationships as they start this new chapter of their career at their employer. We got to make sure that they get everything that they deserve right out of the
Nice.
gate, and then throughout the contract process. So yeah, there's a lot of efforts being put into organizing, and I think sometimes bad employers or tough economies make organizing work a little bit easier, but we're excited to help these folks out, and a lot of these folks, they haven't gotten raises in a long time, and among other things. And so yeah, we're seeing an uptick in folks who want to be union right now, and we're just trying to meet the moment.
Nice. What's one of the things that people or I guess they expect from the union when they first sign up? Maybe that they're a little apprehensive and they're like, man, I don't know what to expect. What's some things that they just at least the minimum that they expect?
So I think, change is hard for folks, and when let's say you've been at an employer for a long time, you might have this sort of relationship with the boss that, yeah, maybe you don't get along, but it's still like they're your boss, and we're we're all people at the end of the day. We don't want to like make life harder on our boss. And I think that's what sometimes people feel like, becoming union does. But the expectations I think folks have right away are different depending on the situation that they're in. Sometimes they feel like they want the representation out of the gate, like we want you to come here and do this and that. And it's like, well, we gotta be able to represent you first. And maybe they don't understand the processes as far as like, the NLRB kind of got gutted with this new administration. And so things are a little slower right now. And the expectations sometimes are for some folks, they're like, I want things now, I want it right away. And it's just, it's sort of not the reality. But I would say a minimum expectation is if they call you, they get an answer, right? If
Hmm.
if somebody calls me, they they're not waiting more than 24 hours to get a response back at a minimum, right?
Yeah.
Ideally, I can answer their call on the first ring, but people aren't left hanging. They have access to me or whoever they're working with, especially when some of these folks work. Like I represent nurses for one of the contracts that I represent, and they work overnights, and so
Mm.
if they get fired in the middle of the night, maybe they'll wait till the morning, but maybe not, and so they're going to reach out, and ideally I can get in touch with them as soon as possible. So they want good communication. Every single group that we have wants good communication with their local, right? If they need you, that's what they want, is they want to be able to reach out and get their issues resolved, or at least have the information that they need to work through whatever issue that they have. And then they want information. They want to know how the process works. How does contract negotiations work? What could my employer potentially do, if anything, to retaliate against us? What are those scenarios, and what do they look like, and what are my rights in that situation? What are my protections? Because I think some people get a little bit fearful of, maybe, oh gosh, if we vote to become union, then all of a sudden, it's going to change my work life somehow. But they don't realize that the process to becoming union is pretty simple as far as like what it takes to do it. But it's very complicated as far as just getting everybody in the group on the same page. It's like, it is a simple thing, and we can do this. This isn't this unattainable thing.
Mm.
But yeah.
All right. Well, becoming president of Local 638, man, I'm sure there's a story behind that you like to share. Since we
Sure.
talked class, I mean, congratulations on that. I mean,
Thanks.
for a lot of people listening and not understanding what that role involves, what is being the president like for their local? And actually, what does it mean day to day? I know you guys still answer all those calls and help answer all those questions, but what else is added to the plate?
Sure. I'll tell you the story real quick of how this happened, because I don't I think it's probably one of the most unique situations I could think of for how somebody becomes president of local. So typically what happens is, somebody retires, and then you hire within, or within the e-board even of your local for who's going to replace that person who retired, right? Or the other way it happens is through an election process. Maybe the previous president wasn't doing the job very well, and so somebody ran against and got more votes, and they won through the democratic processes. For me, it was our e-board going into this last election every 3 years cycle looked very different than the executive board that was approved and through the membership 3 years ago, because we had Trevor Lawrence, who's our secretary treasurer, retire, Tom Bucher, who is our president, retired, Steve Saviola, who is our recording secretary, then vice president, retired, and then Jeff Deedy, who was a trustee, he got a really aggressive cancer and died in less than a year from his diagnosis. So we had a huge change of what that picture looked like at the beginning of this e-board's election versus 3 years later. So going into this fall, when we're up for re-election again, the e-board said, well, we don't want our membership to have we want it to be as consistent throughout the next 3 years as possible. Okay. And Scott Lisi, who's our principal officer now, is likely going to retire at, I don't know, I haven't asked him officially. He doesn't have a date yet, but in a year, right? Sometime over the next 3 years for sure. He won't be on the e-board when we're up for re-election at the end of 3 years. So we know that change is going to happen. And they wanted to, the executive board wanted to put me in the president role sometime in the next 3 years. So what happened was John, was the president of the local, who's one of my best friends. We drove together. We've known each other since the beginning of 2013. Or sorry, 2010. Beginning of 2010 when we started working together. We've been together a long time, really good friends. Part of the reason that I got to be, on the staff in general, came to me and said, hey, we want you on to the executive board in the president's role. But we don't want to do it after the election, because then it'll kind of look like, well, a year ago we voted on John to be the president. Now Scott's the president. That's not fair to membership. And he's right. Additionally, when John came onto the president role, Tom Bucher, who was the previous president, had retired, and he went on long vacation with his wife out of the country. They wanted to travel, and was unavailable for John to ask a lot of questions, right? And Trevor Lawrence at the time was negotiating the UPS contract, so he wasn't in the office, that much when he was doing Central Region stuff. So John, in that new president role, was kind of feeling out a lot of things and didn't have a lot of supports. I mean, he did, but he didn't have, what I think would have helped him get the job figured out a lot faster. So John said, hey, look, we want you in the president's role. I will step down until Scott Lisi retires as vice president, in order to sort of be your mentor in this and help you figure it out faster than it took me to figure it out. And a lot of these just little things every single day, things you need to do, things you need to think about, people you need to be reaching out to, et cetera, et cetera. Additionally, Scott Lisi being in the secretary treasurer role for the next year or so, will be able to kind of mentor me to take over for him when he retires, right? So John took a demotion for a year in order to get my feet wet in the president's role and show the membership that I'm going to be there for, a long period of time, and we're not switching these roles. John was already on the e-board. Scott was already on the e-board, right? So we're not bringing somebody new on before the election. And then when Scott retires, he'll have the ability to have shown John the job, and I've had mentorship. So essentially it creates a sort of Venn diagram transition to allow our e-board to be, and me, to be more successful. So it was just a really, incredible gesture to be able to take a demotion. People in the Teamster world, or organizations in general, typically don't give up titles. So for John to say, hey, I'm going to give up my title for you in order to help you be successful, because that's what's going to help the local be successful, just says a lot about John. And also it keeps, some consistency with the membership as far as our e-board, leadership throughout, for this 3 years, and hopefully, far beyond that. So yeah, it was a really cool thing. When, as I will tell you though, and I told this to the members at their first meeting, I said, when John brought this to me, I was a little concerned. It's are you sure you're not dying? Is your health okay? Because this isn't something that normally happens. Typically people will never give up their titles or, their positions, that, because it just doesn't happen. But, John's a really selfless guy. It's not about him, it's about the local. And so he just wanted to, make sure I was successful, and the local was successful, and the membership had consistency. And that's the way it played out. And additionally, Damone Eady was our vice president. he took a demotion too, so that way this could happen. So both John and Damone said, "Hey, well, we're going to step back for a year and then we'll step back in, in order to get your feet wet." So yeah, really cool on those guys to do that, and we're really thankful, and speaks highly of both of those two guys. But as far as like the job now, I'll tell you, first month of it sucked. the January the January sucked, so I started January 1st, and then volume drops off at UPS, which is our biggest employer, after Christmas, so the work slows down. We got layoffs, and then on top of that, Metro Surge happens, and so we've got a lot of, especially our Hispanic workers who are afraid to go to work or just stopped going to work, quit their jobs at some of our employers, and we're dealing with that. We took a stance on ICE. We're the first Teamsters local to do that, and I put out a press release on it. It got 350,000 views on our Facebook page in 4 days, and I got all sorts of criticisms for it, and that's okay. That's what I signed up for. But some of them from the far, left of the pendulum, which was, this is BS. You're not doing enough. What a weak stance. What a weak president. To the other side of it, which was, you commie MFer, I'm going to find you and choke you out, and death threats and stuff. So it got pretty wild pretty quick. And I realized what I'd signed up for at that point is, calm seas never made for a skilled sailor, right? So here we are, we're in the middle of it, and I wanted to be in a leadership role, and damn it, I got it. So we got through that though, and I think after everything kind of settled down, looking back on it, I'm glad I made that decision, and our members are glad that we made that decision. And it was just one of many things that we're gonna navigate in this role, because sometimes the role of labor is not necessarily just worker related, because workers fall into a lot of different buckets, and at the end of the day, my job in this position is to represent our members as a whole and all of their needs, and progress their needs and wants and issues. So that's what I'm going to do, no matter what the circumstances. But yeah, I learned a lot of skills and a lot about this role and what it's going to mean in that first few weeks on the job. And I'm thankful for it now, but it was a tough few weeks, especially at the end of January. I was like, what the hell did I get myself into? but we're good now, and I'm thankful for it. I've got really good members that are local. I'm really blessed to have folks like yourself and so many others who just give a damn about this union, the labor movement, and taking care of each other. And whatever issues that we face, I think when we get back to those values, then we'll figure it out, because the folks at 638 through and through just want what's best for everybody, and that's sort of our north star, you might say. That's our compass, right? That's what we try to bring ourselves back to whenever we're facing a challenge.
Yeah, that's a lot. Think about your role and all that you're supposed to do, and then add that on top of that layer. I mean, that's leadership in itself is very difficult. Sometimes it's a job that's impossible. I mean, yeah, and that's you're trying to get a job completed, you're trying to get goals reached, but then add those layers on it. I mean, that is a lot to handle. And then I think about the city. It's like you're put right in the middle of like a turf war, and people are going to react differently. Their bodies are going to do things differently than the other person. They're not all be expected to act the same. So how do you keep that unity?
I just want to add one more thing is so when we're trying to like keep the group as a whole, right, and not succumb to getting pulled this way or that way, right, bring it back to the center. It's trying to remember that we're all humans trying to navigate this or whatever situation we're faced with from different lived experiences, right, and trying to see each other, right. My lived experience is going to be different than yours. It's going to be different than his or hers or anybody in our locals. And so when we come to our meetings, we're trying to resolve these problems at our general membership meetings, or just work through it. We have a very diverse group of people with different opinions, and I think that helps us land at the right decision on most topics, is when we can bring in a lot of different people with different lived experiences, and that kind of keeps that coalition, right? Because like for me, I'm navigating this as not only like a business agent and a president of a labor union, but also as like a dad and a husband who my wife she works in St. Paul, so she's going to work and seeing these things, and her patients are dealing with these things. and my kids' school is now closed because they go to a very diverse elementary school, and so now, ICE is in the neighborhoods and by the parent pickup lines and stuff, and the parents are like, I don't want my kids to see that, right? My kids don't need to understand and know about these things. They can't possibly compartmentalize what ICE is and what they're, doing, and so my kid's school goes to e-learning. And so now we're everybody's navigating different layers to what took place, right? And trying to understand what people are going through and experiencing and how that's going to affect them, right? Because our younger members are going to feel it different than our older members, and our members of color are going to feel it different than our members who aren't of color. And it's just and our parents are going to feel it differently than folks who are maybe empty nesters who never had kids, right? So listening to everybody's thoughts and taking those into account to try to land on the right answers is something that we'll always have to do. But it was very evident and necessary to keep the unity of the local throughout that Metro Surge operation.
Yeah, it's almost like people have an instinct within them to, they want to A, probably look for answers, try to figure this thing out, or B, they need someone to put the blame on, or, C, they want to join a cause. They want to make sure that they could be a part of that movement, or sometimes they do a little bit of both. So, yeah, we can't expect everyone to just do the same thing. And you as the president, I mean, that's got to be a lot to put on your shoulders. So as far as what the leadership goes, looking ahead for local 638, I mean, there's a lot of industries that it's not just UPS or nurses. I mean, it's quite a few array of workers out there that you have to speak for. How do you balance all of those, and what's some of the biggest topics that you see coming up in the future? Maybe automation, maybe the conversation is going the wrong way, and you got to help bring that to the attention of lawmakers. As hey, this is important for labor.
Yeah, so on the topic, I'll touch on that automation one first, just because it's pretty hot right now as far as where we're at. We met with the governor and the attorney general. I did, and so did other members of the joint council here last week. I think it was a week ago today, actually, to sort of like touch base on where everybody's at. Now, we'll just say this, that from a bipartisan perspective, I think the majority of the people that we talk with, and it's both sides of the aisle, are opposed to companies like Waymo coming in and taking jobs away from folks in Minnesota, right? Because what happens is, I saw a Waymo vehicle. Now, it had a driver in it right now. They can't be driverless at this point, I don't believe. I have to check and see where the legislation is at this point. But a company like Waymo, right, is owned by Google. They send in their lobbyists, and there's a team of people into these cities that they want to like sort of infiltrate, we'll say, for lack of a better word. And they try to convince folks that this is going to be so helpful and beneficial, and it's not gonna take jobs away from whether it's Lyft or Uber or whatever else you use, that this is going to be just fine. But it's not. And we see that in all these other cities where it's been implemented, that it's the part of the iceberg effect here that we're seeing of slowly we're seeing this automation kind of infiltrate different industries and take jobs away. And the problem that I have, and every single politician can understand, is that it takes away the tax revenue that we need to operate the state, right? So, you and I go to work as truck drivers. We're paying taxes that help fund our roads and our schools and our police and our fire and our EMS and all these structural things that cities and communities need to operate, right? If we don't have that tax infrastructure money here in our communities to pay for the things that we need in my county, in your county, in our state, if that money from a company like Waymo is just going back to tech billionaires in this small little section in California where they all, their companies are held, as trillions of dollars of money in this one little section of like 54 square miles in California, then how do we fund the things that we need? If the people who are working here no longer have those jobs, and those jobs and the money associated with that income is being sent elsewhere by people who largely don't pay taxes, then what happens? Well, I think what happens is a huge increase in the wealth gap, which is the worst wealth gap we've had since the 1800s in America, where you have the haves and the have-nots, and it's a slippery slope. And right now, I think we touched on this before, is Tesla is trying to automate the trucking industry. And could you imagine if, I have a view of 94 where I live, and my daughter, she was sick with the flu recently, was looking out at the highway, and she was counting, like, there was a semi truck every 4 seconds going one way or the other on the highway, right? Think about
Mhm.
that. Think about if all of those CDL jobs became automated. Companies like UPS and FedEx, but also like Ruan and Holland and all these freight companies no longer had to pay drivers, and all these middle class, good paying jobs with benefits and pension plans often, they go away. What happens? What There's no way that we can say they'll find a like paying job with like paying benefits. So it's a slippery slope, but fortunately, the politicians, especially that we communicate with here in Minnesota, are adamantly opposed, and so we as an organization are working with those people to make sure that they're doing the work for the people at our local and state government, so that way we don't deal with this crap, because I don't think we fully understand the effects that this is gonna have on the short and long term. And now that we're talking about automation in the trucking industry, we represent a variety of workers, from warehouse workers to healthcare workers, right? We talked about that a little bit, but the job loss through automation right now is affecting most industries, I would say. I have a good friend of mine, who's an orthopedic surgeon, who's very concerned that robots are going to be taking his job away. That these minimally invasive surgeries that they frequently do are going away because robots have now figured out how to do them faster, more efficiently than humans can.
Let's talk
So
about that a little bit. You
yeah,
think about that. People say, "Oh man, that's just something people are thinking of. That's on social media. That can't be real. That's not going to happen." What would you say that for that? I mean, you're talking about you seeing someone personally, but what if someone were to come back with you're just getting caught up in social media?
well, I think that's sort of like a natural, like, human, like, defense mechanism to problems sometimes. Is It's sort of like, water in the basement, right? If I shut the door to the basement and I don't go down there, maybe there isn't mold forming. I just don't want to deal with it. The problem with that take is that it is happening, and if we look at different parts of the country, especially in places that don't get blizzards like we just had last night, if we look at other parts of the country, like in Texas, where the money in politics for supporting businesses over people is so great, and the investments being made by these tech companies to automate entire industries and take away your jobs is so great, we're not as far away from this issue as I think people want to believe.
Yeah,
Some people, I think, have justified this automation thing as, oh, it's just taking away simple entry level jobs that
yeah,
those people
yeah.
could find other work. And fine, that argument might work today, but if you're taking away somebody's career that pays pays $100,000 a year in taxes versus $20,000 a year in taxes, that's a little different, right? And you look at whole industries going away because of automation, that's a problem. Our
So, what do you think
population isn't getting any
what do you
smaller.
think the breaks is? What do you think the stopping point? What slows it down?
So I always say that, the power is always with the people, right? And I think if the people get fed up enough, then they'll stand up and demand the changes necessary. I just hope that the damage that takes place isn't so great that it's not me apologizing to my kids and grandkids that our generation messed it all up. That we didn't get a handle on this before you guys had to clean up our mess, right? Like, you could say the same thing about the environment right now and the damage that we're doing to our ecosystem in climate change. I don't think we totally have a grasp on that, and we're not making enough, forward progress to combat those issues. But as far as economic and labor issues go, I seriously think that we are so far behind where we need to be, as far as, like, you know roadblock policy to I don't want to say force companies to do the right thing, because I think then that gets away from this sort of like free market that does benefit America in different ways.
So,
But I do think that we need some constraints, you might say, in order to keep workers working, right? Because we know we're union members. If we stop working, everything stops, right? The power is with the people. Like, think about, and it doesn't matter what industry you're in, right? Think if every, you know, fast food worker, let's just pick one, Burger King workers didn't go to work today, how that would affect, different people in different ways. If people stop working or can't work, everything stops. Nothing matters if people aren't able to work. And it, and that can be true in different ways, but especially if you take away their jobs. If people can't work, people are going to find ways to survive. Crime's going to go up, right? People taking part in tax subsidies, right? Because they can't afford to make ends meet. Companies like Walmart, because they don't pay people a living wage, they take advantage of tax subsidies, and so the American taxpayer picks up the slack for what companies like Walmart don't want to pay their employees. But think about if there's less jobs and more people need to, their income levels decrease to even zero because they can't find a job, then now all of a sudden, who pays for that cost that is necessary so people can eat and have shelter, et cetera? Like, there's going to be a breaking point. I just don't want us to get to a breaking point that is going to take so much repair and time and pain for people. Because it is a relatively simple fix, right? It's stop automating and taking away jobs for corporate greed.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think about it when it reminds me of when I was younger. I was a little boy and I didn't understand everything, so I asked questions with my parents. And there was this one intersection that was really dangerous, and people would go by and they'd be driving fast. They would probably breaking the law. Who knows? Stop and go, or I think it was a flashing light. Down south, they had a lot of those yellow flashing lights, and actually, they would have a lot of accidents there. And people would be like, "That's a dangerous intersection. You got to be careful there." And then eventually, I think somebody died, and then they put up a controlled intersection for stop and go light. This is my trucking illustrations, right? So I'm thinking, maybe humans get in a jam, and maybe automation can help where, if it's sicknesses or whatever, then they're not able to do so much. And then automation could step in, kind of like a red light, green light. But instead of it always being green light for automation or just always green light for whatever people want, I get companies have to make money. But if we were able to come up with some solution where both can work together or one can make the job safer, I think it would be a better way to go in the direction versus, hey, I just don't like this, because other companies aren't going to understand that. They're going to look at revenue. They're going to look at dollar amount that's going to be spent on this and what they're saving. That's going to make sense to them. But to the worker, I think if it's safety oriented, helping people be safe and happier doing their job, I think that'll be somewhere we can push the conversation to go versus to say, hey, we don't like something. Because a lot of times these business people don't understand what it looks like to slow something down. They think that you're slowing down progress for humanity. So think about that. You're like, hey, you got to keep the flow of things going. Like that intersection, keep it moving instead of putting up a stoplight to slow people down. What do you think about just, hey, maybe we can have it not so much regulated, but maybe more so controlled for when we need help as a human race to pick up the slack? Maybe that's a direction.
Right.
What would you say on that?
Well, I think I would agree. Technology in itself isn't, bad. I mean, look at, the Teamsters have been through this before, right? Remember when, none of us do, I should say, remember when, but when like vehicles, right? Like were, used to deliver versus, horses, right? Because the Teamsters, if you haven't seen our logo, right? That logo stems from Thunder and Lightning, which were these two horses. We used to be delivery drivers using horses and carriages, essentially. So when trucks became, this new technology, we thought it was going to take away all of our work. Well, in fact, it created more work, right? Because now this work can be done more efficiently, and there was more jobs created from it. The Industrial Revolution, same thing, right? We see, how technological advances can positively impact humanity. But I think that right now there's what's happening is this, you might call it an increase in, technology, is being sequestered by some to negatively impact others, right? It's not this rising tide, that's lifting all boats, right? It's benefiting some and hurting many. And I don't think if this can't be harnessed or understood in a way that's going to positively impact the human race and everybody, or as many people as you can possibly, positively impact, I think what we're seeing now, and even this short sample size, is some making incredible financial gains and many feeling incredible financial impacts. And especially the way our tax laws are set up, where these folks who are making a lot of money, these corporations are making a lot of money, they're not paying their fair share back to, the infrastructure that helps make America run. And that's a concern. So I think it's just going to be a matter of time until we really understand how these impacts here are affecting people in industries here, and here. And I do believe, you can find so many examples of this over time in the story of America, that if the damage is too great or hits a certain point, that the people stand up and demand that it gets resolved, because ultimately, you know, the masses decide what happens in the United States and across the world with the impacts the United States makes. So it'll be interesting to see. But like I said, I just hope the damage isn't too great before that has to happen.
Yeah, there's definitely damage already done. I mean, you think about people trying to just the First Amendment, a lot of the things that people don't want you to say and do. So, yeah, it's people are actually making progress one way or the other. So, as far as the conversation, when it goes to a big company like UPS, you got a driver buyout. A lot of conversation going around that for drivers and workers listening. If you don't already know and
Yeah.
heard bits and pieces about it, you can
Yeah,
probably explain what's happening, what it means for a
sure.
union perspective, because this is your show when you come on as guest. So tell your perspective as to how you think this
Yeah.
will affect the union.
So there's a few layers to it, right? I'll take my union hat off for a sec here, or I should say my president of the union's hat off for a sec. I got into union work because I wanted to make the lives better of my coworkers and myself at my employer, right? And I am somebody who doesn't mind mixing it up with folks and having disagreements and resolving things and kind of going that extra mile. And yeah, I'm a firstborn, so I've had that typical like firstborn trait of like trying to be a leader and like stand up, right? So that's why I got into this. And if I'm being completely honest, right, the idea of giving people a better retirement package when they exit their, career at an employer is something that we fight for, right? I want every single one of my members to be as rich as they possibly can be on the day they retire, and then have, a retirement with dignity and financial security and benefits. I want the whole package for my members. The problem with this buyout is that they are getting to select who receives it, and when they receive it, and they're essentially buying your seniority number. But they're not, at least at this point, they haven't said exactly how they're planning to implement it, right? So we in our contract negotiate the separation packages, right? You work for 25 years as a full-time driver. This is what you get for your retirement. This is what you earned. But UPS is coming in and saying we might select somebody with 20 years of service versus somebody with 30 years of service to get this buyout package. So even though, you worked here 10 years longer, sorry, Ray, Scott's going to get an extra $100,000 and he gets to retire earlier than you because we decided that he's going to get, for whatever algorithms we so choose. It's just not fair. They didn't negotiate this with the Teamsters. They're entering into individual agreements, which is a violation of Article 6. And we've got, a grievance that was just heard at the national panel that I believe is in arbitration now at this point, or going to arbitration, I should say, at this point. But we're seeing the company selecting and choosing who gets to retire when and how, and it's grossly unfair. And we don't know exactly how many of these buyouts they're going to get, who they're going to give them to, what their algorithms are. If they would have negotiated these with us, or at least asked for some level of input to make it even remotely fair, of course we want, because like I said, we want everybody to retire as rich as possible. That's always our goal. But I have an example in our local of a guy who he drove for like 28 years, and then he just took an inside combo job, and then they rolled out this buyout package, and now he's no longer eligible. And so he's
I
like, well, what the
understand
hell?
people get how does that work? People may not understand it. How do you pre-select or cherry pick
Yeah.
someone?
So the company is basically deciding who and how they're going to offer this buyout to. Not everybody who applies for it's going to get it. I'll give you an example of one thing they might do. I'll just use you as an example here. Okay. So let's say you've got 30 years of service. Okay. You're a 30-year circle of honor driver, meaning you've never had an accident. Okay. And I'm a 15-year driver and I get hurt every damn year. And I've been in a bunch of accidents. And they're going to say, let's get Wilkie off the fucking payroll because he's causing us a lot of financial issues. And this guy's, going to continue to, file work comp claims and stuff like that. They might offer me the buyout and not offer you the buyout because they're like, why would we get rid of Ray? He's got no issues. You know what I mean? He's never been injured, never been in an accident. He's probably a few years from retirement anyway. Why would we spend the money on somebody who's already, doing it the right way and on the way out? Is that fair to you? Absolutely not. And for the example I just gave previously, is it fair that somebody who put in 28 years and then just took a different job inside the building, they're no longer a driver because they're only offering this to drivers, right? And they work as an inside combo employee now. So now what? They just took this different job inside the building, and so they don't get the buyout offer because they have a different pay code. That's not fair. So that's there's several layers to why this buyout program just sucks, and ultimately the goal is to reduce the union membership, right? So if we lose a significant amount of members, right, that weakens our strength at the bargaining table. The next time we have a contract in less than 2.5 years that goes into effect in August 2028 for UPS. If they significantly reduce our numbers, right, that significantly reduces the strength that we have to fight for a better contract, and they know that. So by reducing the amount of Teamsters going into that contract fight, it essentially may make it easier for them to offer us worse raises than we would have maybe won, or benefits packages, or language regarding XYZ issues, right? Because we have less strength at the bargaining table. So that's the macro concern that we have, and the concern I really have about the long term is if we reduce the number of members in our local, can we guarantee strong contracts every single 5 years? Well, we're going to have to keep growing in order to do that, right? So
I know you're not with that legal team, so the case is still like active because people are like, well, the UPS Teamsters lost, the company won. What's the status update on that?
So yeah, there was a headline, I think it was in Freight Waves, that kind of I'll say oversimplified it. Because we have a grievance process, I think it was the judge in Massachusetts, and I don't have all the information, so I don't pretend like I do, but I believe it was a judge in Massachusetts that said we're going to let the grievance process play out first, right? So because we have, if you don't have union representation to your employer, right? If you have an issue with your employer, then you're going to have to go through legal processes, hopefully, to try to resolve it. So when the IBT filed a lawsuit against the company, effectively we're being told we have to go through the grievance process first, right? And this happens a lot. I mean, if say you get fired from work and you're like, well, I'm going to hire a labor attorney, the first thing that the attorney is going to say is, well, what happened with your grievance? If you're a union represented employee, right? You have to go through your grievance process first and let your union fight for the issue. So we have the grievance filed for this most recent buyout, but we actually have the last buyout that's going to arbitration. I think it's going to be, I want to say May or June is the arbitration date, or I don't have my notes in front of me. I apologize, but we should have an answer on that before summer, I would imagine, with that arbitration case. So yeah, we're fighting it in different ways. And some folks on the negative side will say, oh, well, it's just, you just care about keeping members and you don't want your people to get this money. And I'm absolutely not. I want everybody to get as much money as they can. I'm just concerned that I've got members who are not going to get it, who should be getting it based on their years of service. And that we've got some people who the company's selecting to essentially get an extra retirement package on top of what we negotiated outside of their years of service in different positions. So that's ultimately where I personally stand on it. But I know a lot of people have different opinions. I'm looking over. This is my first buyout. They sent me one, Ray. They sent me a buyout offer originally. So it shows you how much I'm worth to these people. Framed it. I liked it so much.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's another
they
topic
sent me
that
the
you're
last
stuck in the
buyout
middle.
offer too. Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah, I said they sent me the last buyout offer too. Because I'm still on the seniority list, and it's some folks that are looking at like, hey, this is a chance for me to leave and go do something else, and some folks are looking at it like, man, I can't believe this is all they think I'm worth, or they think that I would actually take this when my benefits and my annual income is and all that this job provides, right, is worth so much more than that. So, but yeah, that first buyout offer was so damn insulting. I decided that I went to I don't know where, grabbed a frame for like $5, and I'm like, I'm gonna put that up on the wall to remember that for the rest of my career, what they think I'm worth to them.
So here's a tough one. I mean, what if you're already going to leave and should you turn it down? I mean, that's a tough place to be. Maybe you just don't want to be at UPS per se, or
Sure.
I mean, I'm already leaving. I'm already retiring. What would you say there?
Yeah, I mean, like I had somebody call me up and said, "Hey, Scott, I'm retiring. I was retiring this summer anyway. Like I got plan. I'm going. Like, is it cool if I take the buyout?" And I said, "Look, you do whatever you're gonna do. I want people, like I said, I want people to have the best retirement possible. And get everything you can out of this job. And if this company is gonna, write you a check on the way out the door, then hey, good for you.
Yeah,
I don't
I
want
think
people
that's
to,
amazing.
turn it down just because your union president says it's illegal, or it's a contract violation. I don't want anybody to ever think that I don't have their best interest, right?
Yeah,
And so if something is in your best interest, then ultimately, I don't want people to have a bad taste in their mouth because they did the right thing at the time by not accepting it. There's a lot of folks who are going to retire, pretty quickly here anyway. And if those folks are already going to retire, then hey, that is what it is.
yeah.
What's going to
I just
happen
wanted,
is when people don't get replaced, and that's the hard
you
part. But
know,
they probably wouldn't replace them anyway.
yeah, I
So,
just wanted them to hear that from you that, you still have a heart. You still have a
oh yeah,
understanding for what people are going through. Some people, there's the business side of things, and then there's also as an individual, you see what's going on. Same thing with, immigration. We're still
mhm,
humans. It's more so how things are being done
mhm,
that people have a hard time getting behind. They understand
yeah,
what immigration is. It's not a new thing. It's how it's being done. Like that lady's saying, they don't want their kids to see this stuff. So, it's just we can have choices, or things can be enforced on us. I think with
mhm,
too, being also a union worker myself, and when someone asks me, hey, do you want to work, versus they force you, it's always a little different tone, and I don't know why,
sure,
but it always just doesn't set as well when someone forces you to do something.
all right,
So, and then you
absolutely,
got people that just want to manipulate the system. So
hmm
you can't ignore that too. So,
yeah.
but you're not getting death threats or anything for this contract, are you?
No, I don't know, man. No, that stuff with ICE, I think it was hitting all sorts of buttons with folks, and people were just kind of reacting. And what I've realized too now is when people have an issue that they're really passionate about, they want to skip the steps, right, and just go straight to now when they go to our website and they say, I need to talk to whoever the president of this local is, rather than actually talking with their business agent first, or
Mm,
their business agent who represents the employer. They may have the individual. People just want to go up as far up as they can, and my contact information is pretty easily accessible. So yeah, but as far as the buyout stuff goes, I think after the people, or I shouldn't say those people, all of us got sent those letters. Those folks who were interested in the buyout. I mean, that was between all of us at the office. I would say we probably took 100 phone calls a day that first week. But if you take everybody, all six of us agents, I mean,
mm,
it was pretty constant, and because people had a lot of questions, how does this affect
yeah,
my pension? How does this affect my retirement? My retiree benefits, and my concern too is like if we have an influx of people take this buyout all at once and we lose, membership, how does that affect our retiree health insurance coverage? Because it's essentially like a subsidy. Is the fund with the membership that we have able to pay for the fund plus the retiree health insurance on top of it if we have an influx of retirees? I don't know. I guess we'll see what happens with this buyout and how many people take it, and then what happens with our health and welfare fund.
Man, that's crazy. All the stuff you're juggling. Sometimes I sit back, I think about, the union stewards and all the phone calls they take. And I get a lot of phone calls, but man, I can only imagine,
Yeah, it's a lot.
just as far as for all this stuff. I mean, people can call you still, even though you may be bombarded, you're still trying to be a dad, father, husband, so how do you juggle all of those conversations?
I have so my wife is a union nurse, and so she understands the importance of union work in general. She's been a union member herself for 15 years, and my mom's retired now. My mother-in-law is retired now, and so without those three women, I wouldn't be able to do this job. Not even close. I don't know anybody else my age in this job. I think, Tanner Fisher from Local 90 in Iowa is president of that local. Is a young guy. Yeah, I think he's probably about my age. Robert Sandoval's from Local 350 out in San Francisco is my age, but neither one of those guys, I don't think either one. Well, I know Robert's not married and doesn't have kids, and I don't think Tanner does either. And so there's a reason when people are like, oh, it's a bunch, the Teamsters, the organization, it's a bunch of old guys. Well, there's a reason for that, because this job, same thing with politics. The job takes a lot of time and energy away from home and away from your family to where, you're kind of married to the job. And I'm just thankful that I've got, a spouse who's super supportive of me in this work, that she knows this is, my passion, and just trying to balance it as much as I can. I don't sleep a whole lot. I take work home with me a lot. If it's like, hey, I was gone we had national panel recently, and I got back late Wednesday and seen the kids in like 4 days. So I brought all my work home with me, so that way I could see the kids during the day, and then they go to sleep, and then I'm up from 8 till 2 a.m. doing stuff that I didn't get to during the day. Until they get a little bit older and more self-sufficient. This is sort of what I signed up for. But I've got really supportive family that helps out a lot. But it's still hard. I mean, the kids will some days kids come to I got a big whiteboard over in the back of the office, and maybe they come hang out with me, and they're whatever, because stuff just has to get done. I can't call in sick because one of my kids is sick anymore, because you have a termination hearing in the morning and we got to get your job back. So I'm going to be there. There's certain things that I just can't not be at now. And so it's been hard navigating some of those things just because it's new. But, the gratification I get from this is so great, like that it just fuels the tank to be able to, navigate whatever. This stuff gets in your bones, man. And like being able to make people's lives better is that intrinsic reward is so great that I think it allows folks in this world of union labor to navigate a lot of different things that are challenges, because the reward for being able to make somebody's life better it's so great. So
Man, I'm rooting for you. Maybe people can give you a little grace. I mean, I can imagine sometimes you wake up out of your sleep and you try to talk on the phone. Sometimes you're not in the best mindset all the time either. I mean, that's an emotional roller coaster.
Well, that's one of the reasons I stopped like drinking. Like I was on, and I never really had like an issue with alcohol, but it was like, if I never want to take a phone call from a member and like I got like 3 beers in me on a weekend, right? Because I represent people 24/7. I took phone calls last night at 9:45. Took 4 or 5 phone calls on Saturday, a bunch of text messages on Saturday because there was a bunch of crap going wrong at UPS per usual, right? And so I was like, here's what happened. It was like I took a vacation about a year ago, and I think I had like, it was in the middle of the afternoon. I had a few drinks in me or whatever. I was, I had my kids around, so I wasn't anything above like a 0.1. But I remember thinking to myself, like, I just got off the phone with somebody who had a work question, and I wasn't in like my perfect headspace. That's not okay. So I stopped drinking alcohol. I try to get more sleep so that way, the stress of like, exhausted right now doesn't, you know, get injected into some situation that I'm dealing with, or I don't bring my work home with me. It's more like I already do. Like I try to leave myself from whatever I was doing at the door to try to be more present with my kids and try to like learn to compartmentalize these things. So those are some of the things that I've just been thinking about, is like how I can be the best version of myself all the time. I've been eating better, getting more exercise. I when I first started this job, I wasn't taking care of myself mentally or physically, and then that started to like snowball. And so the last year, I've been just actively making better decisions with my diet, my sleep, how much water I'm drinking, how much exercise I'm getting. Like I said, just saying that I'm just not going to drink anymore, because that's one more layer to that. So just trying to be like the best version of myself, so that way if I am dealing with something, somebody recently 2 weeks ago got fired at like 4 a.m. and they're blowing up my phone, and I'm like, this is an emergency. So I wake up, I'm like, hey, what's going on? I just got harassed and I blew up back at them and they fired me, and now we're dealing with something, right now, and trying to be as present as possible for those issues when they happen, because they will happen. It's just something I've had to sort of figure out over the last couple of years, but especially the last year. I think I'm just being more aware of how I can be better in all of these little situations as they happen.
Man, that is a lot. I mean, that's a lot that humans have to deal with right now. All of us in general are dealing with a lot, and it's sometimes it can be overwhelming. So taking some things off the plate to make it easier is definitely a win. So I applaud that, your efforts there. I mean, speaking for myself also, yeah, I drink very little because like I said, I'm trying to stay healthy, trying to stay around for my family as long as possible. So anything
Yeah.
that'll slow that down, I'm like, hey, let's push that off a little bit. But also, you got to be ready for whatever happens. You're not sure what's going to happen. Every day seems to be changing. I mean, there's a lot of rumors going around the industry. I know maybe you can speak on that, but maybe you can get ready for a new job position, because they keep saying that Carol Tomei is retiring.
Yeah, I hope that's true, man. It's just been a disaster. And I think even if you talked with some of the folks at UPS on the UPS management side, candidly about how they feel about Carol Tomei, they all kind of feel the same way. Is it hasn't been going well. They don't like the direction, especially the old school folks who've been around for a long time don't like the direction, because they know what works and what doesn't work at UPS, and this isn't working. And it's not good for them. It's not good for the hourly folks either. Everything. I mean, they don't. The reason that this management pool, this talent pool at UPS is so shallow right now is because they don't treat these managers well anymore. The management job used to pay better. It used to have better benefits. Their healthcare sucks. They don't get a pension anymore. you know, I can't find anybody who
Wow.
want to do that job, especially the way they treat them too. I mean, it's a tough.
The non-union
UPS
job.
management jobs are non-union. UPS management jobs are tough, no matter what level you're at. And if I'm just being honest, I feel for some of these folks who do that work, and because they're not getting treated very well anymore, and they're taking away more and more of what used to get good talent into the doors at UPS for their management side, and they just don't have that anymore. And that's again because these corporate decisions that are being made are just not good.
Yeah. We
Yeah.
sit and talk with some people that retired, and they'll say, "Hey, where are you working?" I say UPS, and they're like, "Oh, blah blah blah," and then you see their face change, and you're like, "Man, so what's going on over there?" You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, and the retirees that I talk to, UPS retirees, are very concerned about the direction the company is going right now, and especially with trying to shrink the workforce instead of growing the company. That's one thing that a contract just can't mandate or write language on, is a company actively, self-imploding. You'd never see that in business. Find me a business that says we actually want to stop growth. We actually, it just doesn't. It makes sense when you think about trying to shrink the network and shrink costs and things like that, but it just really doesn't make sense that a business would want to do less and minimize their markets and reduce their growth and close buildings. It's not. I know some people say it's a reaction to the overstaffing and COVID, but this is well beyond that.
Really?
And the in this one, since we're talking about pensions and the retirees here, it's funny. I talked to a retiree recently who was kind of telling me the same thing, that they're on this sort of like health journey now or whatever. because they were very active as a UPS driver, and now they're very not active as a retiree. And they said, I want to squeeze every ounce of juice out of this pension that I can get. I want them to be paying me a pension check when I'm 100 years old. So like they're looking at it, it's like, I'm going to get every single cent that I'm worth, and I'm going to live for a long time. So they got to keep paying me. So I'm like, that's one way to go on a health journey for sure.
Yeah,
So
there's a lot of people out there just trying to make ends meet as long as possible because the way the climate is out there, it seems to be unpredictable. I mean, man,
yeah.
another rumor that's out there is they keep saying, the smaller they make it, maybe they're trying to get someone to buy the company. What do you say on that?
Yeah, there's been some rumors about that. I mean, the one thing that we're concerned about right now is that company Roadie that UPS owns. So Roadie, if you don't know, it's essentially like a last mile delivery service or like gig work. If you use Shipt or something like that from Target or Cub Foods or wherever you're at to order groceries and things. So like localized last mile delivery service. The problem is that if they're using UPS management people or UPS equipment or even, UPS tracking labels and things like that, it's essentially UPS work that they're contracting out to a different company. And so there's one concern that essentially they want this gig worker model, this employer model where you're a 1099 employee instead of 1098 employee, right? Because it's highly profitable when you don't have to pay, these benefits packages and retirement packages, and it can be costly for economically too, because I'm sorry, union workers, we pay taxes that help the economies move. And if we have a bunch of 1099 employees and we no longer have 1098 employees, what are the economic impacts that could have? We also have to think about if UPS is trying to shrink its networking and funnel more business to Roadie, this gig company, is that going to continue to shrink the bargaining unit going into the 2028 contract? I don't know, right? So there's a lot of potentials, when it comes to like the UPS rumor mill, I call it.
Yeah.
I typically will tell folks, until I see something concrete, then I just don't entertain it, because I hear so many UPS rumors on a daily basis that I don't even repeat, because if I repeat it, then it gives it some sort of merit. And I always say too, UPS on the things that are actually true that they actually try to implement oftentimes can't even do it anyway. So if even if things are fact that this is what they intend to do, they can't. Some of those things they can't even do anyway.
Yeah,
We
sounds
were
like that
told
business
forever.
model. FedEx
Yeah.
already tried that, didn't they?
Well, so the problem with FedEx and I have FedEx people reach out to me all the time and want to be union, but the problem is they're misclassified, like you're alluding to, under the Railroad Labor Act. So under the RLA, which they don't really deliver anything by air or the rail anymore, because they're misclassified into that from decades and decades ago. Now their employees are independent contractors. And so Amazon uses this misclassification of its workers as well, where, if you have an Amazon package delivered to you, it's not by an Amazon worker, it's by, Ray's trucking company, and Ray owns those routes and Ray employs those people. So guess what? If that person files a work comp claim or wants to sue Amazon, they don't. They sue Ray, because they don't work for Amazon, even though they're driving Amazon trucks, Amazon packages, Amazon uniforms. And so it essentially protects the company. And the same thing is true with FedEx. If you look at a white FedEx ground truck, by the passenger door, the driver's side door, you'll see Sam's Home Delivery. And that's who they work for. They don't work for FedEx. And so these companies really profit off of bad legislation and misclassification of their workers. And I think UPS with this Roadie company is trying to dip their toes into that as well. It seems like, at least, but we'll see. We'll see what they do. We have grievances filed out of Local 804 in New York regarding Roadie, and so we'll see where that heads to.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show, Scott, taking your time. I mean, that's the one way we're going to be powerful, is to be able to continue to talk these conversations and talk amongst ourselves, share these things that are going to be make an impact on our lives. And so that way it brings awareness, like these quiet things that happen in the background where people are doing things, but yet there's the loud things, the things that are more obvious that are right in front of your face. Those two kind of work against each other. It seems like there's some things that go on that we don't know that the big money makers, the big players are doing, like saying lobbyists and things like that. We don't hear those conversations. We don't hear that work leaving. We don't hear those individuals filing for unemployment or looking for work. But yet, you're the voice of those things. You're bringing that awareness, and so that people can be aware that, hey, there's a shift, there's a dynamic thing that's happening right now, and we need to be aware of. So, starting these conversations are going to be great. And like you said, you're taking these phone calls. I mean, you're keeping the doors open where people can give you a call if they have any more questions or concerns, so that pertain just to them and their family. They can always reach out to you. Isn't that right?
That's right. Yeah, and I appreciate you having me on and discussing a lot of these things. Like you said, a lot of folks that we all are living like this sometimes, just trying to deal with the stressors and the issues that are in front of us, and so sometimes we're unaware of the moving pieces that are taking place. But fortunately or unfortunately, some days I'm in this position where we're working on these problems that are related to these problems here, and the cause and effect relationships regarding labor. So like if we've got any, folks who've got questions, or want to discuss these things further, I'm an open book, and we're always pushing for things that are going to benefit the workers, union or not. Our goal is to make sure that, workers in every industry, are treated with, dignity, respect, fair wages and benefits packages that are going to increase their quality of life and ultimately create a better economy for all of us.
Nice. So yeah, if we can all come together, unite, try to stay in the middle where, where possibly if you take care of that little guy, then everybody will be taken care of. So
Yeah,
thank
no
you
doubt.
for being a soldier for that.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. So, moving forward, anything for people to look forward to? Any final thoughts? Maybe wrap it up before we go. Maybe there's a broader question of you've been working on closely with drivers or workers for some time now. What would you talk about to members to kind of help them stay hopeful about where we're at?
Yeah, so in my first general membership meeting that we had back in January, I asked, my sort of call to action to our members, but just workers in general is, find out what you can do, to benefit your workplace. And if you're in a union, find out what you can do or think about what you can do to benefit your union. We all have, talents and abilities beyond just, what our employer asks of us. And so if you have something that, you can contribute that'll make life better or even just more positive with your work group or within your union, figure out what that is, and then how you can apply it. And if that's talking with people and being social, then maybe you can, create social groups that, offer people an avenue to build relationships and resolve issues at their workplace. That maybe you're an artist, that you can, create something that'll, make your workspace or your union hall or, just a better place or environment to be in. I think we all have things beyond our normal scope of work duties that we can offer to better life for ourselves and our coworkers, if we're willing to, just take a little step and apply it. So that's what I would just ask, is if there's something that you feel like you can be contributing that you're not right now, or you could do at a higher level, just, ask yourself, what is that, and what can I do? I think if we all did that, we'd be amazed at how much better our quality of life would be.
And then something. So, still one more question out of you before you go.
Sure, go
Any
for it.
words of helping people feel that when they maybe they're discouraged about the direction of things are going in the world right now? Maybe it's the economy, the industry, or just the broader climate where we're living. What would you say to those individuals to keep their heads up?
I think you're stronger than you know, and we realize that, with going back to, the ICE Metro Surge operation here in Minneapolis, is, your voice and your community is so much stronger than you know. We had one of the coolest things that I've ever been a part of recently was one of my union stewards, Benji Gomez is his name. He has a Facebook page I'll plug. It's called Benji's Pantry Comunidad, and he
Mhm.
created a food pantry out of his house. And just because he had neighbors who were afraid to go grocery shopping and didn't want to leave home because there were ICE vehicles parked out at the end of their street. They didn't want to go outside, because if you didn't know, like, ICE is just following people home and racially profiling people. My brother got followed home by an ICE vehicle, like miles and miles and miles, all the way till he got inside his house, and they left him alone. But I mean, I don't know, maybe I do, I guess, or maybe we do. Look, we're Native American. Maybe we look like we could be somebody who they needed to check into. But people felt like they weren't safe. So Benji stood up and said, well, I'm going to create a food delivery service, just to get people groceries. And he just took donations, said, hey, we went to Costco and got, hundreds of dollars worth of stuff. But then people started taking notice and said, hey, I think that's a great thing. I'm going to get involved. And he raised in a month, he raised $200,000 and fed 700 families just by himself, and volunteers of people who just wanted to help run groceries to folks who were afraid to leave home. And it's just one person to say, hey, I'm just going to do it. So sometimes that's all it takes, is saying, hey, I know I'm just one person, but I'm going to start doing it. And then that gives people the ability and courage to say, hey, I feel that way too. I want to get involved. And then that, that snowball effect of positivity can be really powerful. But it takes the ability to say that, I'm going to have the courage to say what I feel here and do something about it. And like I said, I think Benji realized really quick he's a lot more powerful than he knew at the beginning of all this. So
that's awesome. That's a lot of reason why we do what we do here at the podcast. So thank you for telling your story. Everyone deserves to be listened to, to get their voice out there. Why would we want to stop free speech? So that's a great thing. I'm glad you're able to come on here and tell your story and help other people see that, not just yourself, but there's a team of people. And you mentioned your executive board. So you guys are getting together, trying to make things better for your local, for all your members. So that's a tough thing to do. Sometimes it may be a mission impossible, but you got to try. And I appreciate that.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you.
Yeah. Thank you. And so for everyone listening out there that's tuning into That's Delivered podcast, if you enjoyed this episode, or if you could subscribe, leave a review. If you have a question or concern you want to talk to us about and want to share it on the show, we would love to hear from you. So we have you, Scott Wilkie from Local 638 on the show, president now for 2026 and beyond. Hopefully we'll see some good things to come in the future.
That's right.
And if you share this episode with anybody so they can maybe they have some concerns and wonder what's going on at the local. So here you have it. Thank you for coming on the show, Scott.
Thanks, buddy. Take care.
Are you a trucker looking for a safe and reliable place to park? Look no further than Truck Parking Club. With locations across the country, we've got the perfect spot waiting for you, whether it's daily or long-term parking. And right now, use promo code DELIVERED at checkout for an exclusive discount. Reserve your spot today at truckparkingclub.com and drive stress-free, knowing your parking is covered.